Okay.
So, firstly, welcome everyone for coming this week. This felt like it was a good topic to do in the sense that it was a good carry on from where we've had some of the previous topics in recent times. Granted, it's a bit more of a challenging time to find work opportunities out there. We have to be optimistic and think that this will turn at some point and things will begin to improve. Oh, don't you hate it when you have a thought and then it suddenly just disappears as you open your mouth? Yes. I don't know where that was going to go. But either way, this feels like it's a good topic to cover right now because in a lot of cases, there are people in this room that have been professional freelancers for a while and, you know, who I think could probably even run this webinar themselves with the amount of experience they have. Why won't that waiting room thing disappear? I've got two people waiting.
I'll do that long.
Which is hovering there and distracting me. That's why the thing disappeared. But then there's also some people here who are perhaps stepping into freelance for the first time. And, you know, if that's you, then this might be a really valuable webinar for us to discuss today because hopefully I'm going to be able to share with you some of the insights and some of the tips that I've, you know, dealt with in specializing in, you know, temporary freelance work for the past 15 years or so. And certainly there's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions as we go as well. So please feel free to do that if you feel like there's a question that we don't answer at some point. So what we're going to be talking about today, how to be a successful freelancer. So I'm going to be talking about why freelancing. We're going to be talking about reasons clients need a freelancer and what does that relate to back in terms of what you have to offer. How to ensure your projects run perfectly. And this is going to be both from a recruitment agency perspective as well as doing it offsite, pros and cons of freelancing, and any other questions that go with that as well. So why freelance? Look, freelance is always going to be what I refer to as a risk versus reward scenario. Certainly as a freelancer, you are your own boss, but you also then have to manage your own business in that sense as well. I'm going to answer the question why freelance via a couple of different stories. The first one I'm going to tell you is Kelsey's story. Now, some of you might know that my background was actually in the music industry for many years. And one of the record labels I worked with, we had an in-house graphic design department. And that's where I first knew Kelsey from. She was a graphic designer that worked in-house with us at that record label and was responsible for album covers and press ads and all that sort of thing. And then when I first stepped into doing creative recruitment work, she actually dropped me a line and said, can I come in and see you? I'm really keen to become a freelancer. And I said, yep, sure, come on in. And she came in, she had a good year of freelancing. And I remember seeing her back then, the company I worked for had an annual Christmas party every year. And I saw her at the Christmas party. And she said to me that in the space of that 1 year, she had learnt more about her craft as a graphic designer than she had the 5 years prior of being in full-time employment. And I think that that's a really valuable thing in a sense that when you're a freelancer, you have to step into a variety of different environments. We all know that sometimes there's 10 different ways to do, you know, one particular thing. So it's about knowing what kind of questions you need to ask to make sure that you're qualifying how it should be done properly, expanding upon those skills that you already had. So really what freelancing does is grow your skill and craft as a graphic designer. The other story I want to tell you about is Pauline's story. Now, it's not particularly a story, to be honest. It's actually a very short statement. But I remember talking to this particular production manager, Pauline, and I remember talking to her and I felt quite inspired because when I was talking to her, it was clearly obvious that she took what she did as a freelancer as being her job and not what she did between jobs. So for a lot of people, I think they fall into freelancing between permanent roles. They see it as being that filler. Whereas when I spoke to her, it was very much about, no, this is what I do for a living. And because she had that mindset, she also had a series of clients who were lining up to get her in time and time again. It was almost impossible for me as a recruiter to be able to book her, because she was always so busy. And I'm pretty confident it was because of the mindset that she brought with it. She was good at what she did, obviously, but she also brought this mindset that this is her job. This is what she does. And I'm pretty sure she's still freelancing right now. This is also perfect for people that have a niche skill set. One of the things I've been saying to people recently is that as we move through this pandemic, as we move through this economic situation that we're in, as clients begin to have money again to be able to hire people, I suspect what we're going to see first off is an increase in freelance jobs for a start. I think we'll see more freelance than permanent to begin with. But I also think what we'll see is clients who are looking for one person that can do 3 or 4 different skill sets. And so I think if you can become a little bit more of that unicorn over this period of time right now, if you can reflect upon where some skill gaps might be within your own set of skills, and to begin to do what needs to happen to close those gaps in and become a little bit more of a unicorn, that's going to make you so much more appealing to clients as we get towards the other side of this. And I think that that's perfect for freelance as well. Clicking the button here. So typical reasons clients might need a freelancer. Vanessa, do you want to do a little bit of this one?
Yeah. So some of the reasons that we've got there is overflow of work. So they require someone who's, when they have an overflow of work, it's usually seasonal. They might have seasonal campaigns where they're busier in different parts of the year. It could be a particular project that they're working on that has a deadline. So therefore, it's usually quite urgent when they need a freelancer. So they require someone who's fast, who has an eye for detail, and is technically proficient. And what we mean by that is, you need to be excellent at the skills that the freelancer is requiring, because you've got to hit the deck, as soon as you get in there. Flexibility is also important as well. Sometimes they may need somebody for 4 hours a day, and then it may turn into 8 hours a day. It could be a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. So flexibility is also really important.
I think an important thing to note here is that generally when businesses reach that overflow state, they are so time poor and so pressured that they've had no other option but to go externally and get someone in. I've actually had a client phone me once and say in a very stressed voice on the phone, "Lawrence, I need someone tomorrow." And I said, "Okay, what kind of person do you need?" And then there was this silence, and she went, "I don't know, call you back," and hung up. She was that stressed, she didn't even realize who it was that she actually needed. And so I think it's someone who can, who understands that you're stepping into a really high pressure environment with people that may not have the time to think clearly. So you need to be able to think a little bit for them and not have to have your hand held in those sort of situations.
Yeah, exactly. And also, they need the conceptual ability. They require someone who has proven conceptual skills and who works with teams and stakeholders well. I think that's a really important point, because you're always going to go in, as Lawrence said, into stressful situations. You're going to be dealing with lots of different stakeholders, so juniors and seniors and people from different departments. So you really need to get along well with everybody, and be cautious of that they are going to be a little bit stressed when you go in there. So you can't say, "Oh, well, I only like working with nice people." They may be stressed when you get in there. Another reason for clients needing a freelancer is if somebody's going away on annual leave or sick leave. And they usually have a little bit more time to find the right person if it's annual leave. And they will also know a little bit more in advance as well, rather than the 5 o'clock phone call to Lawrence or myself needing someone the next morning. They usually give us a little bit more notice, which allows us to find the right person that's going to sit in there with the rest of their team while somebody's either on a long sick leave or on annual leave.
I think that's a really good point as well, Vanessa, because, you know, for the overflow work, generally if I find someone who matches the brief about 80%, I reckon I'll be able to get them over the line. But when it's something like the conceptual ability, where there's a particular project that a client's working on and they're looking for a particular style, I think then it becomes a little bit harder. It becomes closer to, it has to match 90-95% in order for that person to be successful. I think the other thing that we didn't put there, and these are almost the dream ones that you kind of hope you come across, are the ones where it's a headcount issue. And these typically exist in government. So they're the ones where they can't employ people on a permanent basis, but they have a need that is almost similar to that kind of permanent need. So they're not bad ones to find as well.
Exactly. And a message from Jane here to everyone, saying I ended up with a long-term client because they realized they could email me a brief that they may not have even read themselves, and that Jane would be able to sort out the whole project, and they could trust her to liaise with the internal client. It took an enormous pressure off them, and Jane got a lot of work out of them as well. Yeah. And, you know, that's a really good point, Jane, with freelance work. If you go into those situations where it may be a bit crazy and urgent, if you get in there, you can do the work, you get along with the stakeholders, they're going to call you back time and time again as well. So, you know, it's really important to adapt to those different personalities and to be able to make sure that you can work with lots of different people. So thanks, Jane.
So how to ensure your project runs perfectly? So these are tips. Some of them are really obvious, but these are things also that sometimes I hear are lacking when I get feedback from clients about what might have gone wrong or where things might have tripped up. Certainly, the first one there is be flexible. And for me, this is one of the golden rules when it comes to freelancing anyway, is that those people who are able to sometimes drop things at last minute to go in and see clients, or are flexible with their hours or what they can do, are the ones that tend to get the callbacks the most. You know, I certainly don't begrudge anyone who only has certain days or times that they can work. But, you know, when people approach me, they're only available one day a week for freelance. And there's certain hours that they have to work, it becomes a little bit harder for them to match what the client's requirements might be. So I think that flexibility is a good thing. If on site, take a notepad and pen and ask questions. This is an interesting one, and I think it's a bit of a balancing act simply because you are stepping into an environment where the person might be a little bit stressed. And you need to have a little bit of your own kind of emotional intelligence here to be able to read the situation a little bit, to make sure that you're taking the opportunity to ask the questions you may need to ask there and then, without necessarily being someone who the client might feel needs to have their hands held. I think this one point particularly comes down to experience. I think as you go into more and more environments and have that kind of checklist of things that you need to ask, it becomes a little bit easier to get some of those initial questions out the way really quickly. It'll be obvious things like, you know, how should the file names be done? Where will I find, files, that sort of thing as well. But even just asking really obvious questions, like the next point here, what is the outcome that you're expecting? What's the finished output file meant to be, and how long have I got to do this? You know, what's the time expectation that you have around this? Because I know from my own experience, sometimes the worst feedback has come from people or from clients that felt that someone took way too long in doing something. And if they just asked at the start, you know, how long have I got to do this, that could have been worked around. Put your hand up 15 minutes before finishing whatever you're working on and asking what next. It shows a really proactive approach. Be able to read the environment. That's kind of what I was touching on before. And ultimately be professional. You're going to walk into some environments where, let's face it, some people are going to be stressed, and people handle stress in different ways. Don't take it personally, however they are. In a majority of cases, you're going to have a really great environment to work in and really enjoy it and build some great networks. You are going to have the occasional one where it might be a little bit more challenging. But, be the professional in that situation and know that you can walk away from it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Has anyone got any observations about that? Or Vanessa, do you want to add anything to that as well?
I think also being patient. When you get in there first thing and maybe a computer's not ready or the passwords have not been allocated to you yet, don't get upset about it. Everybody's a little bit stressed out. So being flexible and also being patient, because I know that frustrates some people when they get in there before they start, that they're trying to get a computer or laptop from somebody else and passwords to get into emails and shared documents. So patience is also a good one.
I guess one of the things also to be that we're not really used to yet, that we as recruiters have to remind ourselves, is that we are living in a world nowadays with COVID-19, and so I think just being aware of what the setup is there as well in terms of making sure that you have your health and safety as a priority. So is there going to be particular social distancing rules or in-studio requirements around that work health and safety to make sure that everyone's kept safe too? So that would be another thing I would raise as being a point to discuss, and that shows that you're thinking not just about your own health and safety, but the people that are there too.
Yeah. And just before we move on slides, Jane's got a good point there, and it goes back to the one on the screen saying, put up your hand 15 minutes before finishing and ask what's next. Jane said from a client point of view, it's for an hour or so. And I had feedback from clients saying that the person finished what they were doing quite early, but didn't tell them about it, didn't ask for more work, Be proactive. Say you finished something earlier than expected. Can you check it? And what else can I do? Is there anything else that I can help you with? So really good. Thanks for that, Jane.
I've had clients tell me they've gone up to check on the person and found them on Facebook. And, that's not professional. That you just need one or two of those instances to happen, and the client will be completely disengaged with you. And I've even had instances in the past where people have found people sleeping under desks. True story. So, you got to be mindful of what kind of impression that gives at the end of the day. On to the next slide. If it's an offsite project, now this is obviously something that's going to become more and more commonplace now. In the past, I know particularly for recruiters, we avoided things going offsite simply because it meant that there was a greater opportunity for miscommunication to happen and for things not to be completed in the way that the client wanted. So this is a process that I have been using for years now to help to ensure that offsite projects run the way they're supposed to run. So the first thing I would always suggest to the person is that you take a clear brief which has a complete understanding on the final output. So you know well in advance what it is that you're looking to do. I can remember one instance of someone who had been engaged to come up with some branding. They had spent the week coming up with 3 options, which would be pretty common standard. That wasn't what the client wanted. They just wanted one, and they wanted 2 days. That hadn't been communicated, and as a result, the client was really annoyed at that outcome. So it's really about, not assuming anything, taking a really clear brief and a really clear understanding on the final output. Leading on from that, agree on the total number of hours you believe this might take. If you want to put in a couple of extra hours there just to put a buffer, that's absolutely fine as well. But, if you say, well, I think this is going to take 40 hours and the client agrees, then at least you know what kind of time frame you have to work within. I would also suggest that you update your client at the end of each day as to the progress. And it doesn't have to be much. It might just be an email saying, this is what I've managed to do today. Or to send through some rough sketches or something, just so the person is kept informed and has an opportunity at each point to go, yes, you're on track with what I want, or no, I feel like you're not getting in the direction I want, and can speak up sooner than later to make sure we get things back on track.
also something they may have briefed you in and anticipated to take one day could actually take longer. So having those regular check-ins is really, really important. You know, creativity, we can't always put a timeline on creativity and how long it takes to do something. So I think that's a really good point, Lawrence.
Mm. And that leads to the next one. Do not exceed the agreed number of hours without permission. Now, sometimes there might be things like if you've been sent the templates to redo or something, and the templates have been completely massacred over time, and you've only discovered this as you've started working, you have a really valid reason to go back and say, look, I think we need to actually restart this from scratch. Mm. You know, there's lots of different things that may pop up that no one could anticipate until the job started that may require additional hours than what was agreed. But I think by being proactive in that sense and saying, look, we're getting up close to this 35 of the agreed 40 hours, I think it's actually going to take 45 or 50. Are you okay for me to do that? It's really making sure that there's communication happening every step of the way. Make sure you save and safe. Well, make sure you're safe. Yes, safe, yeah. That is a typo, but that is also a very good point. Make sure you're safe. Don't do designing in the middle of a road or in a pool if you're using electrical equipment.
My typo.
But make sure you save and check all the files is a good one, regardless if it's on-site or off-site. We have had, I think, Vanessa, you've had instances as well.
Yeah, that's why it's my point. Yeah, somebody didn't save all the high-res images into the final files, so they were all low-res images, and yeah, couldn't go to print. So yeah, super duper important. And also where to save all the files, and going back to Lawrence's first point, how to actually name the files. Again, as a freelancer, you're going to go in somewhere where they have got a process and how to name files and where to put them. So super duper important. Check, check, and double check.
Mm. And the last point there, be professional. You know, this is obviously a reflection of who you are as much as your work. Yes, you are going to have some frustrating clients. You know what, no matter if you're a freelancer or in your own business, whatever, there's always going to be some personality clashes that go on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't take much to just have that higher ground and to be professional and to make sure that you're communicating. I honestly believe when it comes to freelancing, you can never not communicate enough, is the key thing there. Jane keeps sharing some of her experiences as well. Jane says, horror story. Once time the team needed some work completed from an off-site freelancer by noon on a Friday, so that other team members could continue the work over the weekend. The freelancer rang at noon on Friday and informed us that they had been really, really busy and hadn't started yet. Now, that might sound like really poor form, and it is, but that sort of thing can happen quite frequently, and it could be completely worked around by a phone call at the start of the day. Things happen, sometimes out of our control, but by giving the client that power to be able to decide is the best way to do that. Yeah. We've also had in the past freelancers that agree to do assignments and then pull out that morning.
Yeah, that's
and
tough.
And that's, you know, that comes back to being professional. At the end of the day, it's like, look, if you agree to do it, obviously there's always going to be options and obviously things come up, but you know, the communication aspect of it is important as well. Mm-hmm. Jared said, point 4 is as accurate as a tradesperson not charging more to a customer without their permission for a job. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I came home and asked for, you know, a tradesman to do my kitchen and found they'd done my kitchen and bathroom without asking and charge me for it, that would be really bad. So, not that that's ever happened, but that's probably a really bad analogy, actually. I'll just shut up. Does anyone have, before we go into the next point, does anyone have any questions or any insights or any experiences of their own they want to share? I feel like I'm just rambling on here.
It's just so interesting, Lawrence.
Right, okay.
It's interesting what you're saying. That's why everybody's quiet.
Let's chat then about the pros and cons of freelancing. So, as I said at the start, it's a risk versus reward scenario. Here's some of the pros. You are your own boss. And with that, you can decide which jobs you wish to take. Sorry, this is what happens when I'm trying to control the room.
I'm doing that.
Right, okay. You didn't see that. It's my Jedi mind trick. Rightio. So yeah, you are your own boss. You can decide what jobs you wish to take. You can manage your own time. If you want some time out, that's absolutely fine as well. You get to work on different projects, a bit like Kelsey's story earlier. It means that you can work in a whole lot of different environments with a whole lot of different creatives. And because of that, you get to network. You get to build some relationships with people within the local industry, as well as get to see how different agencies do different things as well. You can develop your own services too, and you can work across multiple revenue streams. So you don't have to just rely upon a recruitment agency. You can go direct. You can look at a whole lot of different ways in which you can get your skill set out there. The cons, though, are that you are your own boss. That can sometimes be as much of a con as it is a pro. And in my experience, freelancing is not good for people who want certainty. It takes a certain mindset to be a freelancer. It's not ideal for people who can't budget. I generally remind people around September and October to start putting some money away for December, because around December, historically, it gets quiet. And there's nothing worse than having people phone and say, I've got no work and everything's shut for Christmas and I have no money. So it's not ideal for people who don't know how to budget. And it's not great for people who like chasing up invoices at times too, especially in an economic downturn where people might be submitting invoice after invoice and find that there's a lot of chasing to do. I have heard horror stories of people that were chasing up to a couple of months worth of invoices from clients that haven't paid in the past. And so it's ideal if you have got that business tenacity to phone clients when they're running behind and say, where is my money, or I'm not going to continue working. So any thoughts from that at all?
Yeah, any questions on that?
Jane says money management is so important. It is good to have a financial buffer at all times so that you can pay the bills short term in between projects or seasonal downturns. I absolutely agree. I think if you're a freelancer, learning just how to do a basic budget is going to save you a lot of headaches and hassles throughout the year. And if you can learn how to just put aside, a few dollars each week over the course of the year, that adds up and you can take a good break at the end of the year. Basil, as a freelancer, do you need an ABN? So that's a really good question. If you are working with clients directly, you probably will need an ABN. If you go through a recruitment agency, you'll generally be engaged under a payroll company and engaged under what's referred to as a PAYG setup. And the simple reason for that is that the ABN doesn't view, or the ATO doesn't view an ABN as being a legitimate company structure. And so if there was any auditing done, it can go back to bite either the creative or the company a bit on the butt. So I think it's if you're going direct, it's absolutely fine. If you go through a recruitment agency, you're likely to be asked to go under a PAYG setup.
Yeah. A good one from Jared. Can we use a debt collector for unpaid invoices as a freelancer? Yes.
I can't see any reason why not.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll have to
provide a service.
Yeah,
you provide a service.
Yeah. And from Sandra, how do you get consistent clients? I know one freelancer who consistently gets clients, but I struggle with this even though I have pretty good network of clients. A lot of it also comes down to how much work the client actually has. As we said, it could be stop, start, stop, start. Having a lot of clients at the moment could be great, but they may not all have work on. I guess it's my advice would be to register yourself with different recruiters and a little bit of your own networking with clients as well. Also, network with other we don't hear this enough, network with other people with similar titles, because if somebody is a senior print finished artist and they can't take on work, you could recommend somebody else who's a senior print finished artist, and vice versa. Because sometimes I know when we call our favorites, and especially if they're unicorns, I'd like to know if they know anyone else that does exactly what they do. So networking is an important one for that one.
I had another point that disappeared out of my head again. That seems to be a reoccurring trend today.
Well, I'm going to answer the questions because we're having a few coming through and I'll miss them if I don't see them. So from Maria, do you have tips on moving from employee to freelance work with the same company?
You know what? Oh, and that was what I was going to say. Thank you, Maria. Your question prompted that. Awesome. So the last week or so, I've been phoning quite a few creatives to check in and find out how things have been going. And what I'm noticing as a trend out there right now is that and these are really senior designers as well. So they're either saying it's completely quiet and dead and there's nothing going on, or some of them said they're getting dribs and drabs coming through. But what I'm finding when I quiz them a little bit further on that is that it's generally with companies that they've worked with before. So in terms of, do we have any tips on moving from employee to freelance work with the same company? I don't particularly have any tips other than to suggest that you would ensure you have your ABN set up and invoice it properly. The agreement that you have with that company is going to be between the two of you. But it seems to be that is the trend I'm noticing at the moment, is that people are being, and essentially you can understand that as clients start to have work coming up, the obvious thing they're going to do at this moment is to tap into their existing networks to see who's available. That makes sense. You know, I've accepted that. It's only when they find that those people aren't available, which in a job short market is unlikely, that they'll probably turn to us and say, who have you got? So it doesn't surprise me that tends to be one of the trends I'm noticing at the moment.
Yeah. And a good point from you, Nikki. I like this because you do this as well. Don't be too fussy or picky. Within reason, it's still money at the end of the day. So yes, some jobs may be more amendment based.
Yep.
So with very little design. But, you know, if especially coming through recruiters, we will usually know that ahead of time. So we may actually preempt that and say to the freelancer, if they're a designer, a senior designer, it's not that senior. The job is nearly complete. They need somebody to look at it. It's not going to be, you know, rocket science, but just knowing that going in advance is good. I've also offered jobs to, or projects to freelancers where I know where the hourly rate may actually be less for that particular role. But, you know, again, you discuss that in advance and say, okay, for this role, I will do it at a cheaper rate. But when you need me again for the role that I am good at, then the rate needs to change. Mm-hmm. So it's all about communicating, and it's all about being clear at the beginning of the project what you need to do.
I don't want to put Nikki on the spot, but in terms of, you know, when I talk about freelancers that are professional and flexible, Nikki is the epitome of that. You know, I've worked with Nikki on and off for, I think, 10 years, maybe, something like that. And, you know, the great 16. Okay, who's counting? And the great thing about Nikki is that she knows what her strengths are. She knows what she's not good at. She will say yes or no on the spot, and she's reliable. Reliability is a big one. And I have that trust that I know that when she goes in, she is just going to dedicate 100% of her focus on that. You know, I don't think I've ever had negative feedback for Nikki. So no. It's those kind of experiences that, for me, give me that confidence I need to know that when I speak to my clients, I go, there's this fantastic freelancer named Nikki. Let me send her across for you to have a look at. So, you know, I think definitely when it comes to freelancing, she is a great example for me of someone who I would turn to for many, many jobs.
Yeah. And I agree. I'm also going to sing your praises as well, Nikki. You know, as I said before, we have discussed projects that are much shorter or may not be, you know, using your full capabilities, but we discuss that and we go in there in advance knowing that. And that's a great way to network with clients as well. You know, you may come in and do the smaller work, but then they've met you and know that you're capable of doing the bigger work. So, yeah, we love working with Nikki.
Maria says, thanks for clarifying. Moving to freelance is due to returning to my home abroad, which leads to my next question, tips on freelancing remotely. So where are you moving to, Maria? Ireland. Okay. So here's what I would recommend if you've got existing clients here locally, is that your pitch to them would be that you can be their night shift. They can send you work at the end of the day, and then when they get back in the morning, it's in their inbox, finished. That would be my sales pitch for it.
And you know what? That actually works with quite a few companies. They love that. I know 2 agencies that have clients in different countries, so they actually use people here to do the work during their nighttime and then send it back over. It works really well, as long as there is that half an hour or 1 hour overlap. So that if you've got any questions, then it's not left for another 24 hours to be resolved. So work out what that window of opportunity is to actually communicate in real time. But as Lauren says, it's great. Yeah, you can be the night shift. Fantastic.
Other than that, I think like any freelancer out there at the moment, I'll be looking at what are perhaps the niche skill sets that I have that I could promote myself forward for. How do I get in front of potential clients, and how do I continue to promote that I'm available? You know, it's really coming back to that brand that we did a few of the earlier webinars on. So it's worth perhaps looking at them and making sure that your brand is out in front of people too.
Yeah, great. Do we have any other slides, Lawrence, or was it up to
I think it's
time anyway?
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, there we go.
So basically, the slide is what we're doing right now. Right. So hopefully everyone's found this beneficial, or at least getting a bit more of an insight into some of the experiences we've had. You know, I'd say that for every 15 or so freelance assignments we have, generally one will go a little bit pear-shaped for whatever reason. That could be down to a handful of different reasons. So I think the more that we can promote what it is that makes a good freelancer, the more we can eliminate those bad experiences.
Good question there from Jared. Do you charge hourly or daily? Look, I think 6 months ago we could say either or, daily or hourly. But my personal opinion now moving forward, I think you should only quote hourly, because the time we're spending less time on jobs, spending less working time during the week. And also if you're going into a role where you may not know how long it's going to take, you're better off charging hourly than daily. You know,
I think also the flip side of that, if you think in the advertising world, Vanessa, where you come from originally, how long's a day?
A day could be 16 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever I had clients say I want a day rate, my general question is, what does a day mean to you?
Yeah, what time? Do you get paid?
8 hours, it could be 16. And if you're charging a day rate, you could be seriously undercutting yourself.
Yeah.
Are there any networking events that you can attend? Potentially, but I think that a lot of them are still finding their feet in this current COVID-19 environment. So the reality is that with the restrictions from you guys, that is, yes, you're at it. This is it. Look, we aren't doing in-person networking events right at this point in time. We're mainly keeping it to these virtual meetups. But of course, this is an avenue where if you do have any questions, this is exactly where you could ask them.
Yeah.
So,
and for you, Basil, send me an email with your CV and a link to your portfolio, and I'll put you on our list.
yeah, I'll put the emails up because that could be a better slide for us while we talk. Jane says I would specify how long my day was. I had a long-term project and I worked out a week rate that was based on 4.5 times 8-hour days, giving a slight discount for a long project. That's pretty generous of you. Certainly, although I think, yeah, working out the project and working out what that hourly rate is and if it's going to work for you is the best thing. And in fact, that comes back to budget. If you know what your budget is for the year, what you're aiming to earn, that's going to help for you to determine what your hourly rate needs to be per week.
Yeah. And from Rebecca, as a new mum, on-site is more difficult. So looking into off-site. My big panic about going freelance is not being able to find work. I work in quite a niche sector. Would that make it easier or harder to find work?
Depends on the niche. Theoretically, if you have a skill set that not many people have and it's in demand, then that would be what you're focused on promoting. Understandably, at the moment, we don't want to sugarcoat things. It is obviously tougher to find work out there at the moment. We are going through a recession. And so I think it's hard for anyone to make any promises at this point in time. As I always say, our crystal ball technology isn't fine-tuned just yet. The best we can do at this point in time, though, is to continue to promote yourself out there, to continue your own professional development so that you are developing more skills, and to continue to communicate, because as opportunities come in, I know that I'll be approaching people that are front of mind for me.
And Rebecca, I'm not sure of your current situation, but you said about going freelance. If you are in a permanent role at the moment, please stay there as long as you can. It is difficult freelancing out there at the moment, but do your networking while you can, while you still do have a permanent role, if that's the case. And what I mean by networking is connect with people on LinkedIn. You know, that's how we network these days in this current situation that we've got. If you need some more tips on that, we did a whole webinar on LinkedIn, so I'm quite happy to send that to you if you can't find it.
Jared, do clients usually specify what equipment a freelancer needs to use or has on them for a job? So two answers there. The first one is that many clients in the past for on-site work would have a freelancer station set up. I don't know how that may work moving forward. I imagine they're going to have to clean the station after each person to keep up to date with what might be happening with COVID safe requirements. In some instances, particularly with smaller businesses, they may request that someone brings in their own equipment. But of course, I think that in the immediate future, we're probably going to see more requirements for people to do work off-site. So the assumption will be that you have your own equipment and have either an appropriate Creative Suite license or similar software that will open the Creative Suite files.
Yeah, and I think that's, it goes back to my top tip of communication, actually communicating that either with the recruiter, if you're going through a recruiter, or with the client directly up front. There's a lot of, for instance, project management tools. As with a creative, you still have to use them. Should you download that beforehand? Do they have usage for that? Do they give you passwords to get into that and download that so that you have access to everybody else remotely? Or do you just need to download something and have that ready? I think there's nothing worse than starting on a new job and you haven't got the programs on your computer and you're downloading things. We all know how frustrating that is before you start working. So
that if you don't have a Creative Suite license, I think there's a program called Affinity which will open Creative Suite files, and they have affinity equivalents, which I think are around $35 per package for a lifetime license. So there's always ways around it.
Yeah.
But yeah, essentially the expectation I think moving forward will be that A, you have your own equipment, and B, that you have the software to be able to do the job.
Which should answer the next question from WR. You should have that equipment, and you should have those programs to actually do the photography, do the video, and do the content. So that's our answer for that one.
Yep.
And Jared says, thoughts on why people say if you don't use Stern, you aren't professional.
Can you give us an example of that, Jared? What have you experienced in that regards? Because that might help us to get a better understanding of your question.
Nope.
Of course, people feel free to unmute your microphone and chat. If you don't use the red camera for filmmaking, you aren't professional. Well, to be honest, I have to be honest, I don't know terribly much about the filmmaking world, so I couldn't really comment on that if that's an accurate question.
Look, I can. I've worked with a lot of directors and photographers. I think this is very much in that creative niche of photography and directing. I think that might be just an ego comment that they are making. It's a bit like fashion. Oh, if you're not wearing this brand, or if you're not wearing that brand, you're not cool. This is what I hear with photographers and directors. So I'm sorry that we're not specialists in those fields, but that's my understanding and my answer for that one. I hope that helped, Jared.
I think as a freelancer, it is worth, though, keeping across what the latest trends are. You know, if I had someone come to me and say that they were using CorelDRAW and PageMaker, I'd be a little bit disturbed. You know, so it's about making sure you are keeping up to date, at least with what the current industry standards are. So I don't know if that's related to that or not.
But using the cameras and photography and all that sort of stuff, it really is it's a very niche, area that we're not professionals in. So we can't really answer that one. I think that's better asked to a professional photographer rather than us. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions at all?
I have a question. I was just wondering if you have people on your books that are constantly freelancing, like they kind of just go from job to job, and they might be with a few recruitment agencies and that sort of thing.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, of course. It's not uncommon to have freelancers that come to see us that are freelancing with other recruitment agencies, as well as freelancing directly with their own clients as well. You know, I always say that it's as I said earlier, it's worth having multiple revenue streams. And, you know, the reality is I have some freelance clients that will work exclusively with me or with us. So I know that other agencies have that as well. You know, at the end of the day, it's really about making sure you have a few options there to help ensure that you have those opportunities coming into you.
But I think a really good point on that one, which is an additional point that we didn't bring up today, which I think is important, is as a freelancer, it's super important to list where you have worked and where you have worked through different recruiters. Because sometimes what may happen is that a client will come to us and ask for a graphic designer, and we will go to our top graphic designers, and they may have been asked by another recruitment company for that exactly the same job, because some clients think they're going to get a better deal if they go to more recruiters. That's a whole different story. We won't get into that. It's not. But it's very, as recruiters, you should actually have a list somewhere where you have done freelance work, and if you've got that through a particular recruiter or not. Because also what has happened in the case is that freelancers have worked for a particular client, but it was 18 months ago or 2 years ago through another recruiter. And then you can go through us or go through them direct once you have had a particular amount of time in between those freelancing gigs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, that's super important as freelancers to keep track of where you worked, who it was through, and when it was. It's really important.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just plug something in here?
Sure.
Yeah, so when I went to film school, I actually had staff members. This actually includes instructors and lecturers. They were actually insisting that a particular piece of equipment or a particular tool or a piece of software is the way to go. And they were like, and they were not like saying, okay, no, your tools don't matter. It's you, the filmmaker, that matters. So it's basically you, the filmmaker, or it's you, the editor, that makes or breaks your content, not the tools you use. And I think I've summed it up in when I wrote a bad handyman will always blame his tools, won't he?
Mm.
Yeah.
I agree. Look, I think that, ultimately at the end of the day, your creativity is going to be what makes the difference between you being a great freelancer or your technical prowess, or however you want to describe that, whatever it is that you bring that works for you. I don't know why. Maybe it's my music industry background. I always go to the Beatles for an analogy with this sort of thing. But keep in mind that when the Beatles made their initial albums, they were using old mono 4-track recorders. And they were able, with that equipment, to create this incredible discography of music that changed the world. So you would ask, in that instance, was it the 4-track mono or was it the Beatles that created that? And the answer, of course, is it was the people that were doing the recording. It's what you bring to the equipment that's going to make the difference there.
But in saying that...
Oh, here we go.
I'm sticking back to the freelance. If a client does have a specific program or data or software that they're using, then that has to be used. That's got
to be because that's what they have in their studio, isn't it? Or it's what
the requirements are. I can do that job, but I'm doing it on something completely different. Yeah, no, because as a freelancer, you usually have to work in with what they can do and how they save their files. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I actually agree with you. If that's what the client requires, then that's what they require. And thanks, Cecilia. I love that you love the music analogies. Awesome.
Oh, he'll be using them more. You'll have to come every week.
It's my music industry pass coming up again, isn't it? Yeah.
And Sandra, she's got to go. Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, my video is playing up. Can't turn audio. That's all right. Sandra, you were emailing us anyway. Okay, guys, I think that's about it. Unless there's any last questions that have come up, I think we've covered quite a lot today. Both Lawrence and I just really hope that it has been useful for you. Sometimes we think we talk and talk and talk and we don't know if it's been useful. So
we do talk and talk and talk.
So we hope that has been useful. And as always, we will record this. So if it's going to be beneficial to somebody else that what we have talked about today, then please share it with them. And as always, if there's anything else that you would love to have us talk about, because we love talking, email either Lawrence or myself.
If we can't talk about it, we'll hopefully find someone that is an expert in that area that can talk about it.
Okay,
great. As well.
And there's so many more resources. As I said a couple of times throughout this webinar, in particular, there was a link, LinkedIn, how to network on LinkedIn. That was a whole webinar on itself. Lawrence mentioned, and it's actually thanks to Jane, who's here. Jane did one on personal branding. They're all great webinars to go in and get information from, and build your network and build your brand.
There's still things that happen weekly for me lately where I think back to that personal branding presentation.
Yeah.
And apply some of the things that I discovered through that. So that was, thanks, Jane, again. That was a great one.
So you can find all of our blogs and the reruns of the webinar on our website. You can also follow Creative Recruiters on LinkedIn. And we also have our own YouTube page where everything is posted as well. So you've got lots of different avenues there to get.
And a Facebook group too.
Facebook.
Which is the Creative Recruiters Virtual Meetup Facebook group.
Facebook group.
It only has about 40 or so people in it at the moment, but it's obviously a place where any of these discussions can be continued.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your thank yous.
We'll see you guys next week, hopefully. Next Wednesday at 1.
Wednesday. See you later. Bye.